Hi, and welcome to Charity's Vegan Kitchen. Today's tutorial is on our white loaf bread mix. When you receive your bread mix, it's going to come in a packet like this. You'll have your actual bread mix, you'll have a packet of yeast, a packet of dusting flour, and your instructions. So we're going to start our white loaf bread mix. This is the mixer method. So you're going to start by taking your 1 cup of warm water and pouring it into our bowl. And you'll take the yeast that's in your packet and you're going to sprinkle that over. I like to stir it up after I've put it in, but you don't have to. I find that it helps the yeast get happy. And then we're going to set this aside for 20 minutes. So now that our yeast slurry is ready, we're going to go ahead and add in our 1/3 cup of avocado oil. Just give that a little stir. And then you would be adding, after you've shaking up the mix in your bag, you would be adding that into your bowl. Once you've combined the dry and the wet ingredients, you're going to go ahead and put it on your mixer. Using the dough hook, we're going to start it on speed 2 just until it's slightly combined, and then we'll move it up to speed 6, and we're going to mix that for 7 minutes until the dough pulls away from the side completely and is soft. Remember to keep a spatula handy in case you need to go in there and scrape off the sides. So now that our dough is done mixing, we're going to go ahead and take it out of our mixer. I like to have a flexible scraper on hand in case there's any dough stuck on the sides. Helps you scoop it out very easily. As you can see, our dough is very soft and very pliable. So you want to take your dusting flour and put it into a small bowl so you have access to it. And all I'm doing is just taking my dough and I'm rounding it, shaping it a little bit. If your dough is a little sticky, you can just coat some flour on your hand. And you want to set it to proof. You can do it in a small ball and you can put it in one of your bread baskets to proof, or you can I just like to use a sheet pan. And since I'm going to bake it in a loaf pan, I try to elongate it a little bit. So you want to make sure that when you do place your dough on a surface, you want it to be floured so that it doesn't stick. And you can either coat your dough with flour on top and cover it to proof. Now, using flour does give you a thick skin on the outside, which makes for a thicker crust. So that might be an option that you would prefer. I just use some avocado oil. That's what your 2 tablespoons of avocado oil are for. You can either use a little brush to apply it. You can put a little bit on and use your fingers. I just use a spray. And you can cover it. You can put it in a deep bowl and cover it with a wet cloth. I just like to use saran wrap. You don't want to cover it tight. You want it to be lightly placed over the dough because you want your dough to rise double in size. And if you restrict it, that won't be good. We're going to set the dough aside and allow it to proof for 75 minutes. So now that our dough has proofed for 75 minutes, we're going to go ahead and shape it, put it into our loaf tin, and prove it again for another 60 minutes. Okay, so we're going to grease our loaf tin. You can use some flour if you'd prefer. I do find that it tends to stick a little more with the flour. So this is our loaf. As you can see, it doubled in size. It's beautifully proofed. Now I'm not going to punch any air out. I'm just rolling it into itself until I achieve the shape that I want. And I'm just portioning it out here so that it fits into my tin. There is some air bubbles. I'm not popping those either. I just want it to go right into my tin so that it can prove in that shape. Again, I'm going to spray it with a little bit of avocado oil. Now we're going to score this loaf. You can use a scoring tool or you can use a serrated knife. Either works. So you're going to go in a slanted diagonal slit. I'm going to do 2 slits up top. I'm going to do one with the scoring tool, and then I'm going to do another with the serrated knife. And you don't want to go in too deep. You just want to allow it to come up a little bit as it proves, gives it a nice, beautiful shape. And that's basically all that we're going to do. And then we're going to recover this and prove it for 60 minutes. So our loaf finished proving. So I initially set it to prove for 60 minutes, but because my house is kind of cold today because I lowered the AC down because I'm doing a lot of baking, it took a little bit longer. So I added an extra 15 minutes. But this is what it should look like. It should come up off of the sides about 1.5 inches. And now we're going to put this in the oven and we're going to bake it at 400 degrees for 30 to 32 minutes. Now, every oven has a different heating gauge. So some ovens run a little bit hotter than others. So let's start at the base. So let's start at 30 minutes and you check your loaf and see if that's how you like it. I don't mind a darker crust, a darker exterior. Some people like it very tan. I personally like a darker crumb on my bread. So gauge it to see how you like it and then go from there. But the recommended baking time is 30 to 32 minutes. Okay, so now we're back with our completed baked loaves. And I wanted to show you the difference between a dough that's been kneaded in a mixer and one that's been kneaded by hand. Because when you knead the dough by hand, it takes a little bit more effort. The loaf tends to be a little bit more dense. But as you can see, there's not much of a difference there. The, the dough that was kneaded in the mixer is slightly higher. You can definitely knead the one by hand a little bit more and then allow it to prove a little bit more if you want it to rise a little bit more. But at the end of the day, it's still a beautiful result. And this is what it looks like on the inside. Beautiful white loaf, very soft. And this is the dough that was kneaded in the mixer. As you can see, there really isn't much difference. They're both quite beautiful. And they're both very soft. And you can get 19 slices at a 1/2 inch, I believe, out of each loaf. A couple things to keep in mind. When you take your bread out of the oven, ensure that you allow it to cool 3 to 4 hours prior to slicing. There's a lot of moisture still trapped inside your bread, so you want that to release before you start slicing it. It also allows for a more stable structure when slicing. Now I use a bread box, and this box I got from Amazon, but this is what I use to store our loaves at home, and they last about 5 to 6 days in this box. You also want to keep in mind that if the area that you're storing your bread in is quite warm, it may not last as long. Now, our loaves have no preservatives in them, so they're not going to last as long as store-bought bread, obviously. But you can also freeze them and they freeze quite well. As you can see, it's quite beautiful to slice. You can do a thin slice, you can do a thicker slice. I use a slicing machine at home so that we get very even slices. So this loaf was baked for 30 minutes. As you can see, the crumb is quite light. And this loaf was baked for 32 minutes. You see, it's just slightly darker, but it does have a firmer crust. So let's talk about freezing. If you're planning on freezing your bread, you want to ensure that you put it in a plastic bag and that it's sealed quite well. And as long as you store it properly, it will hold